This is Storytelling with a Purpose, a Memory Fox production. Hello, everybody. This is Celine Krizan, your host, and I'm excited to be back with a really special guest, Cindy from Aces Matter. In today's episode, we are breaking down some really important topics that are super timely to today and especially to this season. We're talking about triggers, we're talking about trauma, and how our behaviors are really huge communicators for us. We understand that really our past is such an important part of our present. And Cindy breaks those things down and talks about not only how she founded this nonprofit company, but how she's growing it today and how she's collecting and using her community to really be a key part of her marketing strategy. You will really enjoy this episode, I am sure. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Cindy. Welcome to Storytelling with a Purpose, a Memory Fox production. Today, we are joined by the one and only Cindy Stanford, founder and president of Aces Matters. Welcome, Cindy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad I've been looking forward to doing this, especially after investing in the program. So thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to chat because you and people will learn so much about your organization today, but you really have a great brand and you have so much perspective. So I can't wait to dive in and talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you.
So do you mind kicking us off and talking about, tell us your story. Tell us how you got to where you are today.
I got to where I am today, Celine, because of my childhood traumas. And I know that is not like a sexy way of putting things.
Right.
It was because of my childhood traumas that I didn't even realize were called traumas until about a year and a half ago. So when I started learning about these things called ACEs, it's an abbreviation for adverse childhood experiences. I learned from this study that based on how much stress we are exposed to in childhood, it essentially dictates how we will navigate life as adults. In short, I will say when I realized that understanding ACEs helped me understand why people behave the way they behave, I was like, everybody needs to know about this, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of times we neglect to attribute our childhood to how we navigate life as an adult. So my childhood traumas, in addition to some of my personal and professional relationships, experiences, led me to doing this work when I realized, maybe I'm not as crazy as I thought I was. And, maybe there's a reason why that boss that I couldn't get along with or that colleague that I couldn't get along with behaves that way. And now I even understand as a parent of a now 21-year-old, I understand why she was behaving the way that she behaved. So I would say, in short, Celine, all behavior is a form of communication. And that is what ACEs Matter understanding the ACE study has helped me understand. And that is what drove me to invest the rest of my life into helping people understand the causes of ACEs and how to prevent them. So that's a little short without telling you too much about what qualified my traumas as traumas.
But it's beautiful owning that, right? Owning your traumas, being able to talk about it, being able to be transparent and honest. And that's what I love about your organization. Yeah. And if you can talk a little bit more about what drew you to, I know you have just such beautiful qualifications, a background in learning technology and education. So how does all of that pull into it? And how did you use that education to inform your mission now?
Well, I honestly, Celine, I did not have any idea that 2 master's degrees later, $170,000 worth of student loans later, that all of that would lead me to doing what I'm doing today with Aces Matter. So I ended up going to school, became a teacher, was in charge of all of these hormonal middle schoolers. And again, remember, I did not know that my childhood was filled with trauma. I thought it was just normal, right? They called it ACEs in the science community. We called it culture. That's just the way things are, And so now here I am as a 20-something-year-old trying to tell middle schoolers in a very impoverished neighborhood how to behave when I never learned
Mm-hmm.
how to behave myself. So
Mm-hmm.
my degrees got me into teaching in Title I schools, and then from that, I ended up going back to school and getting master's degrees. I became a principal, did the technology thing, and so I think what the Holy Spirit, for those people that believe in spiritual side of things, I think all of those experiences, including everything that I had to go through in my childhood, was meant for me to be able to develop a program that would allow people to access this information in a user-friendly, culturally responsive way. So I could take what I know about technology and I could put this information in people's face virtually, right? My privilege was that I got a chance to leave my neighborhood, and it was an adult, it was a teacher who just kind of took me under their wing, got me in college. And because I had that privilege of being able to leave that environment that I grew up in and go off and go to college and educate myself, I think that there are still a lot of people. I know that there are a lot of people that will not have that opportunity if there's not a
Mm-hmm.
team that sweeps them up like that one did for me. My mom worked really hard to basically, she gave me her only mode of transportation so that I could get in the car and drive off to college. So all that to say, there's several kids that did not or will not get that privilege unless there's a mentally healthy adult in their life. So all those skills, both the technology, both being a teacher, both being a principal, starting a charter school in the state of Texas, and then being able to pull back from a bird's eye view, if you will, and like look back at those experiences and all of those kids and all of those teachers and all those people involved in education, and realizing none of us knew about this, right? The
Yep.
study has been around since the 90s, and here we are navigating a school focusing on arithmetic, math, and history,
Mm-hmm.
totally ignoring that these kids are going home to very dysfunctional places. So I'm hoping with all of the debt that I have incurred, going to school and trying to like be an educator is going to now take what I'm doing with ACES Matter, and we're basically turning ACES Matter into like an academy for other people who want to learn about this and then go back out and teach other people.
I think everyone should be a teacher for at least a year, right?
Yeah.
I did AmeriCorps for a year and I worked in a charter school. So when you brought up charter schools, that just like cued something in me. And it's fascinating because you're exhausted, right? Like you get burned out, but you
Yeah.
realize so quickly, like what privilege looks like and how like what you don't understand about trauma when you're thrown in a classroom and you're not trained on it. How do you connect and communicate with students? How do you do all of that? And I think that's how teachers burn out. That's how we find educators. How do you take people under your wing? So can you talk about your programs? Can you talk about how you help inform people regarding their trauma and helping that next generation?
Well, the first thing, and thank you for acknowledging that. And hey, fellow, I wasn't AmeriCorps, but one of my roles in my principalship was hiring like Teach for America people.
Okay, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So those days. So one of the core philosophies for ACES Matter is to make sure that every Title I school, and the Title I schools are
Mhm.
personal to me, and not only because I went and graduated from one, but also because my entire education career was working with Title I schools. And Title I schools basically, for anybody that may not be familiar, it's the schools that get kids who are living in low socioeconomic status. It's like a percentage of them are all going to this school. So
Mhm.
all the schools that I work with, qualified as Title I schools. And what ACES Matter wants to do, not just necessarily for the school system, but our program is really designed to help adults first understand. Because remember, without mentally healthy adults, we're not going to raise mentally healthy kids.
Mm.
Kids look up to us, even
Mm.
though they may pretend as if they don't see what we're doing. They are modeling a lot of what we do. And so if adults are responding to stress in certain ways that are unhealthy, then guess what? The kids are being programmed and are witnessing, right? And so what
Right.
we do with the ACE program is we first help people understand the science behind it. The science behind it, even if you did not go to school to become a teacher, basically says the one thing we all have in common, no matter who you are on this earth of 7 billion plus people, I'm going to put an asterisk at the end of this. We all had to go through childhood. Nobody
Hmm.
got to skip childhood. Now the asterisk is unless you were genetically modified somehow, and I don't know.
I hear, yeah.
You know, so none of us got to skip childhood. All of us have a brain that develops a certain way. And so, what we want to do is to help people understand the science. So, even if you did not go to school to become a teacher, if you skipped over your childhood development class, everybody can understand the brain at a surface level to understand that all behavior is a form of communication. If we understand that stressors cause our brain and our bodies to respond and develop in different ways, now we can make sense of that person in the cubicle who just can't get along with anybody in the office,
Yep.
So our program is designed to help people understand the science, know your own stress and your own triggers before you try to know somebody else's. Like on the airplane, they tell you put your mask on before you put the other person's on. So the program, first and foremost, is designed to help people understand how does this fit with who I am as a person. Even if my childhood was cookies and cream,
Hmm.
chances are 1 in 6 people are affected by ACEs. So chances are somebody in the cubicle next to you is going to have them.
Wow.
So we try to give people a reason to understand that even if your childhood was great and you don't see any adversities in it, somebody you're going to interact with in the 7 billion plus population world will have been affected by it. How awesome would it be if you knew how to interact with that person without knowing anything about that person? So we start there. The second thing in terms of the programs that we are developing, obviously, it's a startup nonprofit out of Winter Park. We are working on getting the communities involved in this. So, for those people that are
Hmm.
familiar with Avon model or like the Tupperware model, we had
Yes,
parents
yes.
using that. Okay, so we're basically recruiting people who have a personal investment in their own zip code. And what we want to do is to have those people learn enough about ACEs where they can then go out and knock on doors as if you're selling Avon and then
Hmm.
be able to teach somebody else about it. And of course, I'm using that facetiously, but the idea is to have as many local people out of the community investing in this conversation so that you can hold a conversation with somebody else that may be struggling with ACEs or have an interest of becoming a trauma informed school or a trauma informed business. The end goal is to have every single home and school, especially those that are in low socioeconomic areas, talking and doing something about adverse childhood experiences.
The way you just described that is just so beautiful yet simple and insightful because you're saying, you're like, okay, I'm using my community, I'm using these people who are already out there who are doing it to get to know the program. And you explained it to me in a way that was, I understood. It's like everyone I interact with will be, could be, or might be affected by this or be interacting with someone who is.
Yep.
So how do you engage those people to tell your story? How do you educate them to then go out and transform their own communities? Where is storytelling just a key part of that?
Storytelling is a key part of that. From the vantage point that we have, obviously, we've been, I formed this business about a year and a half ago and, building the plane as we
Ah,
go, building the plane as we go. But here's the key thing that I've learned just in my informal anecdotal interactions. Storytelling is key to what we're doing because a lot of us never talked about what happened to us in childhood because we were afraid, we were ashamed.
mm,
And so storytelling, not necessarily like having to dig up somebody's entire past or have to relive that moment, but the idea of storytelling via ACEs Matter is to give people a platform to reshare your story if somebody didn't hear you the first time around.
ah,
So a lot of sexual abuse survivors, which is a very hard topic to talk about, especially if you were
mhm,
being sexually abused in your, if it was somebody in your own home or a relative, right? There's this shadow of shame associated with a family having to admit that Uncle Joe or Aunt Sarah molested me, right? And we
mm,
want to keep that in the house. We don't talk about our business outside the house and beyond skin color. I've seen so many different people say, "Oh, that was just like it was in our house." Like we don't talk about the bad
mhm,
stuff, right? Like we keep it in house. And so the idea of storytelling is for the next generation to see that, hey, maybe we didn't get it right in our generation, but the more of us that get comfortable talking about it, the more of us will be able to get help when it happens and not having to wait until we're 30, 40 years old, dealing with autoimmune diseases because our body was in so much stress as a child.
right?
So the idea is like tell your story and don't be ashamed of it because I know that storytelling not only is it currency, like I don't want to make it about like, people exploit people, on some of these
Right.
television shows. It's not about exploiting people's story. It's about using people's story so that their story can breathe life into someone else who felt like they were alone in this situation. And I think the more comfortable we get with having people doing that, the fewer people that will be affected by it, affected by these childhood traumas.
So now you mentioned that you've been on this journey for about a year and a half now, just starting your own company, and especially in the nonprofit world. What a time to be starting a nonprofit business, right? Like it's not only so needed, but it's also such a challenging time to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that and your journey in that regard?
I will say the biggest challenge for me in starting a nonprofit is um, the amount of detail and organization that is required, right?
Yes. Yes.
And when you know that, well, I'm going to speak for myself. I know my limitations, right? I know, growing up in a very stressful childhood environment programmed my brain to always be on the go, to always be in
Hmm.
fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode, right? And so I will say the biggest struggle was, for me, just overcoming some of the things that I knew. Um, my reluctance was really more of some of those thoughts that were programmed into my mind from childhood that were subconsciously keeping me from like moving forward. Okay, so that's the personal side of it. The second side of it is the funding, right? And I think after we've gone through this, this lockdown and this pandemic, we have so many people that are in need of mental health services as a
Yes.
result of just this shift. Check this out. What ACEs tells us is that if you have traumatic childhood or a childhood that is filled with adversities or let's say domestic abuse, we'll take that as an example. A child growing up in a home where their parents are constantly arguing and fighting, it's basically reprogramming their brain to be in protective mode all the time.
Mm,
Okay. So now,
okay.
fast forward 20 years later, here we are with this pandemic. I never learned as a child how to deal with violence or arguments or disagreements. So now I'm frozen like in time because I got stuck where I got stuck. I may be
Okay.
33 years old, but I still feel like that 13-year-old watching my mom and dad not get along. So that's a struggle too, just because, so many people need access to mental health. And a lot of them don't know that handling stressors as an adult reflects how you handled them as a child.
Can you talk a little bit about, because in the nonprofit world how much work you have to do, how burnt out you can get, and the way you're describing this, understanding your traumas from your childhood, how much it plays into your day to day now. So, what actions for people listening to this today, what could you take to not only help heal, but do that self development and that healing process? How do you start?
Well, the first thing, let me say this: I'm not a physician. Obviously, we do our shows and our information is for educational purposes only. Um, we do have the program being developed so that when people take their ACE score, which would be the first thing I would recommend people do, take their ACE score, know their risk assessment by answering those 10 questions from the ACE study. Start there, right? And then when you have that information, one of the things that what we would guide people to do is to get a coach or a therapist.
Mm,
Now, the
okay.
end goal for ACEs Matter is to be able to help offset the costs associated with, hiring a coach or hiring a therapist. And funding, obviously, is a big issue
Hmm.
because as nonprofits, we need funding to be able to do all these nice things. So, one of the long-term goals is that we don't want money to be the reason why people can't get access to this. Once they find out, oh, maybe it is my childhood trauma that's causing X, Y, Z. But we definitely say know your trauma score, and the score is a number that tells you, here's the risk if you don't, try to figure out what's happening in your body subconsciously and subconsciously in your mind. Get you a coach and get you or a therapist, but definitely get access to somebody that can help you process that. So, those are two things that we encourage people to do as a result of like hearing or learning about ACEs. And I hope I answered your question. I think it was two parts. So let me know if I didn't.
No, you did. It was
Yeah.
beautiful. And a part of that is you talked about your educational workshops. So content and thinking about in the marketing and storytelling realm of what we talk about here, that's a huge core of what you do and how you push your mission forward.
Yep.
So how do you find time to produce this content? What's your strategy and your structure there? Because clearly it's a key part of ACEs Matter.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you, before I met Memory Fox, it wasn't gonna be easy. Where was Memory Fox a year ago? Okay, so I'm gonna say I'm gonna put a plug in for you guys because the minute I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. Memory Fox is going to make my job a lot easier because a big part of what we want to do is to honor the fact that we live in an deficit um, attention deficit world where we're always on the go. You got 3 minutes to catch my attention, if that. So I think
Yep.
Memory Fox is going to help me solve that problem of like getting, quick tidbits of stories that will keep people, engaged, like the TikTok version of stories. And before Memory Fox, and even still now, it's like people, I'm sorry, this is going to sound really weird, like we've gotten to this place where a lot of people don't read,
Yep.
and even myself, right? It's like, oh, that's too long, that
Right.
email is way too long, I can't read that whole email. And so because we know we struggle with attention issues because of so many moving pieces, our goal is to like have the content that's bite sized. And so before, you guys, it was a lot of editing and chopping, and yeah, it just wasn't working. But again, the long-term goal is to use the storytelling with media because the media tells the story. And for us with ACEs Matter, I look at the camera and the microphone, allowing the person that's on the other end watching to see that that ace had a face. And now you can
Mm.
connect that face with that story. And that was the direction that I wanted to go when I signed up with Memory Fox, is to let people see aces have faces. And one of those faces might look like yours.
That is so beautiful because
Oh,
you're right.
thank
We do, we're not, but you're part of that trauma is a huge part of it. And understanding it, but also being able to own it and being able to educate yourself on it. I think you're reminding me a lot about asking yourself, okay, what happened to you before you react to a situation and before you react to someone that might be really aggravating you, which sometimes
Yeah.
I'm not so good at, asking yourself what happened to you and putting a face to it. And on social media, online, it's so easy not to. It's so
Yeah.
easy to disappear behind
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So kudos to doing just amazing,
Thank
great work.
you. Thank you.
So, any advice you would offer to someone who is entering the nonprofit world, someone who's new in their career, who wants to make a change and wants to make a difference in the work they're doing? What would you say to them?
My advice to somebody who wants to um, embrace this nonprofit world is to find somebody else that's already doing it that may be starting at the same place you are. There's nothing better than a collaborative partnership with somebody else who has some of the same visions or goals as you. So I would definitely say, before you form your own nonprofit, see if anybody else may be willing to go in with you, or if there's another local organization, which I know that there are, that may be having a hard time getting started because there is power in numbers, and it doesn't make sense for us to like start, building all these nonprofits and then now we're competing for the same funds. So
Hmm.
I would definitely say I would have taken that into consideration before I started, which I didn't know. But now I've immersed myself with other organizations that are like-minded, and so on the back end now I'm working within these organizations, but I could have done it collectively if I knew that in the beginning. And then the second piece of advice that I think would be helpful is there is nothing better than what I call behind the back praise. Having somebody else know what your vision is and what you want to do, talk about you when you're not in the room, goes a long way. And it's behind the back praise because then you have somebody else that's somewhat pre-launching your program for you without you even being in the room. So talking to people about your vision, um, and your mission prior to getting deep in it, and that way you've got people that are ready and willing to support you once it is formed and ready to go.
And what else? What have you learned in this past year? Is there any, besides, of course, thank you for plugging Memory Facts. That was nice of you. But what else have you found and discovered from a marketing and storytelling perspective that has made your life easier?
You don't have to do it all alone. Like, I was under the impression that everybody wanted to be paid in order to do something, and that's not true. Like, that was
Hmm.
something that was in my mind that ended up not being true. I ended up with 5 reachers, and I call them reachers, which are it's kind of synonymous with teachers. But I ended up finding 5 reachers, 5 different states that all love the idea and the conversation, and they have volunteered their time this past year to help us launch our online podcast of videos. And these people are doing this on their own. And so finding other people that are willing to volunteer because they care about the cause is like extremely important. And I've been able to use other people's voices to get this message out in 5 different states for free. Now, ideally, I would like to pay them, but the fact that I was under the impression that nobody's going to work for free, that's not true. That's not true. If it's the right thing, and it's of the 7 billion people, again, that's in the world, just got to find the right people, and they'll do it for you.
I love that. Trust your network. Lean into the people who are willing to help you, and all, like, what is that phrase? All, like, high tides rises all ships. So paying it forward is huge. Yes. Tell me about how can we support you? How can we support ACEs Matter? Where can we connect with you and be a part of your community?
That's a great question. So first thing I would say, be supportive, visit acesmatter.org. There's obviously opportunities to give financial donations, even if it's just $5, one-time $5 donation of $5 a month. Any little thing will help because it allows us to continue to produce content that's free to the world. So visiting acesmatter.org, leaving a donation, signing up to volunteer. If you have skills that could contribute to helping us get more people to tell their story, volunteer. If for whatever reason money is not an option, that would be the first thing. And then something that has been extremely helpful, because we want to be the loudest voice online when it comes to talking about ACEs, follow our social media pages. And we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn. Following and sharing any content allows us to continue to establish that presence online so that there's no human being on earth that has never heard about these. So that would be helpful.
Before we go, can you talk a little bit about TikTok? So you guys are on TikTok. People have been asking about that all over the place. How do you find time to develop that content and keep playing around with it?
Well, it's, if I tell you, then I would have to get you to sign an NDA. No, but I will tell you, one of the things I am currently recruiting is to find a few people who could be TikTok representatives. Our TikTok platform is not as robust as some of our other platforms, but TikTok, again, is one way that we know we can target a younger generation of people who may be currently living in these things called ACEs and not even knowing how to cope. You know, let's say that their parent is just like offline and don't want to have anything to do with learning stuff. Then we want to like be able to give teenagers and adolescents tools to like learn how to live in those situations or how to adapt or be resilient in those situations. But my end goal is to outsource talent that can use TikTok in a way that is going to benefit not just ACEs Matter, but the cause in general. So developing content is not easy, but we do have a strategy where we actually like to promote other people's content because there's a whole bunch of other people already out there talking about it. And what bigger flattery is it to like reshare somebody else's stuff? So with permission, I do get a lot of people that are willing to allow us to reshare their stuff because it aligns with what we're talking about. So that's one of our strategies that we use because we don't have to develop it all. It makes sense for us to develop it all. There's so many other people talking about it.
And like you said before, you don't need to do it all by yourself. Like you won't go far. You go further together. But thank you. Any last words you want to leave us with?
I would say know your ACE score and love your fellow man. Every person on this earth had to go through childhood. We never know what somebody may be struggling with. And even if somebody is being, what we would call a jerk to you, understand that it is never about you. Like understanding that everybody has their own triggers, and the moment we can understand how those triggers evolve, the moment we can start creating a more loving humanity, even for those people who don't have parents that can like give them their all.
Thank you, Cindy. Go take your ACE score and do it for humanity. That's what a beautiful way to end it. Beautiful mission you're working with. So
thank you.
Okay. Thank you again for tuning in, and thank you to Memory Fox for creating a platform and creating a space for us marketers and nonprofit leaders to tell great, really important stories. So make sure you go take and understand your ACE score. Make sure you really know this work. It's so important. Thank you to Cindy and her team for all the work they're doing in our community, in our schools to help us in the next generation just be better people all around. So thank you and see you next time.